I'm 92, and last Tuesday, I opened a box I hadn't touched since 1965. It was wedged behind a dusty sewing machine, buried under decades of forgotten sweaters, greeting cards, and kitchen gadgets I swore I'd use again. At first, I thought it was just old junk, outdated, useless, and probably moldy. But the second I lifted that lid, something strange happened. A smell hit me, faint lavender and attic dust, and I froze. It was as if I'd opened a door into a life I forgot I was still grieving. Inside was a handkerchief with my initials embroidered in blue. Next to it, a bundle of letters tied with a faded shoelace. One envelope had a coffee stain shaped like Idaho. And in that moment, I wasn't standing in my living room. I was 28 again, barefoot on the kitchen floor, reading a note from my husband, who's been gone 30 years. I thought I was decluttering, but I was waking up memories that had been packed away like fragile china. So let me ask you this. Have you ever touched something, an old recipe, a worn-out flannel, and suddenly, it wasn't just an object anymore? It was a version of you, one you didn't realize you missed until it stared back at you. If you've ever felt that, you're not alone. Tell me in the comments. What have you held on to that still holds on to you? Because today, we're not just talking about tossing junk. We're talking about the hidden cost of holding on and the freedom that might just be waiting on the other side. Odella Winsley is 92 years old, and if you met her on the street in Duluth, Minnesota, you'd never guess it. She still wears bright lipstick, corrects people's grammar with a smirk, and insists on pushing her own grocery cart. Thank you very much. She taught second grade for 41 years and still keeps a stack of spelling tests in a worn drawer because one day, someone might want to see how kids used to write before. Autocorrect ruined everything. Odella lives alone now, in the same cozy house she and her husband bought in 1957 for $11,000. The wallpaper's faded, the floors creak in certain spots, and every corner holds a story. But lately, those stories have started to weigh on her. Not emotionally, physically. The back bedroom's full of boxes. The closet's crammed with coats she hasn't worn since Reagan was in office. There are at least 3 blenders in the pantry, and a drawer of mismatched Tupperware lids that haven't met their containers since Bush Sr. For years, she told herself the same thing many seniors do. I'll get to it eventually. But last month, something shifted. She was reaching for a cake pan she hadn't used in decades when she lost her balance and hit the counter. Nothing serious, but it shook her. That night, she sat at her kitchen table and scribbled 3 words in her diary. Before I go. Not in a grim way. Odella isn't planning on checking out anytime soon. She's sharp as a tack and still makes the best lemon bars on the block. But she knows the truth. The longer she waits to deal with her things, the more she's leaving behind for someone else to untangle. Her kids live out of state. They'll have to make hard decisions in a rush if she doesn't make them first. So she's made herself a birthday promise. By the time she turns 93, the clutter goes. But Odella isn't just clearing out junk. She's embarking on a journey. Most people over 60 will understand deeply. The process of deciding what still represents you and what belongs to a version of yourself that's quietly stepped aside. If you're watching this and you've been putting it off too, ask yourself, are you really saving these things for someday? Or are you afraid that letting them go means letting go of something else? Odella's about to find out. And what happens next might just change the way you see your stuff. And yourself. Stick around. This story's just getting started. Odella was halfway through sorting the teaching years box when she saw it, tucked beneath lesson plans, faded classroom photos, and a stack of laminated name tags. It was lemon yellow, with 2 buttons missing and a tiny ink stain near the collar. A cardigan, soft, stretched at the elbows, and clinging to the faint scent of chalk and vanilla. She held it up by the shoulders and almost laughed. This old thing, she muttered to herself, already reaching toward the donate pile. But her hand froze midair, because that wasn't just a sweater. That was the first thing she ever wore to her first day of teaching, way back in 1951. She remembered everything. The butterflies in her stomach, the way the hem wouldn't stay flat, how she walked into that classroom of 23 squirmy 7-year-olds with sweaty palms and a folder full of hope. That sweater was the armor she wore when she became Miss Winsley for the very first time. Suddenly, she wasn't in her living room anymore. She was back in room 3B, smelling pencil shavings, hearing the squeak of sneakers on wax tile, and feeling the warmth of a sticky hand grabbing hers during recess. Tears welled up without warning, not because she missed the sweater, but because she missed her, the young woman who dreamed of changing lives, who stayed late making bulletin boards and kept extra crackers in her desk drawer for the kids who forgot lunch. Odella sank into her chair and hugged the sweater to her chest. And then, slowly, she folded it. With care, like it mattered, and she set it down, this time in the let go pile. Because that moment taught her something many of us forget. Letting go doesn't mean pretending it didn't happen. It means honoring it and allowing yourself to carry the memory, not the object. Too often, we cling to things out of fear that if we give them up, the people we were back then disappear with them. But Odella knew now that young teacher still lived in her heart, not her closet. So here's a question for you. What's one thing hanging in your wardrobe? Not because you wear it, but because it once meant something? A dress from your first job interview? A tie from your wedding? A robe your child gave you on Christmas in 1987? What if you didn't need to keep it in order to keep what it gave you? Tell me in the comments. What piece of clothing are you holding on to? Not because you need it, but because you're not quite ready to say goodbye. Tucked in the corner of the hallway closet, behind a stack of brittle photo albums and a broken floor fan, sat 2 cardboard boxes. They were marked in Odella's neat teacher handwriting, Peter's things. She saw them on the second day of her decluttering mission, but she didn't touch them, didn't even glance for long. She dusted around them, pretended they weren't there, because that handwriting wasn't just labeling, it was warning. Peter had been her youngest, her dreamer, always sketching in the margins of his school notebooks, always building something with his hands, birdhouses, tiny boats, a go-kart they never quite got to finish. He died at 34, a drunk driver, 2 decades ago. But grief doesn't keep time like birthdays do. Odella knew those boxes hadn't been touched since the week after his funeral. She'd packed them while numb, folding his flannel shirts, wrapping up his sketchbooks, sliding in a few cassette tapes he loved, just to keep them from feeling too empty. And then she sealed them shut, both literally and emotionally. Now, sitting on the floor with the sunlight slanting across her knees, she reached out and opened the first box. A wave hit her, not the violent kind, the quiet, suffocating kind. On top was his denim jacket, the same one he wore every Thanksgiving, even when it didn't match his slacks. She pressed it to her face and whispered, "You stubborn boy." And then, without realizing, she laughed. Because the pockets still had loose change and a crumpled grocery list in his crooked writing. Milk, peanut butter, gas, birthday card for mom. She sat there for over an hour, just breathing, touching, remembering. That's when she understood something we rarely say out loud. Grief doesn't always live in our hearts. Sometimes, it lives in the stuff we haven't had the strength to open. For many people over 60, especially those who've lost children, spouses, or even old versions of themselves, objects become more than things. They become anchors, evidence that the person was real, that the love was real, that the pain still is. But grief disguised as clutter doesn't heal in a box. It softens when we face it, when we let the memory wash over us, and still choose to move forward without fear of forgetting. Odella didn't throw away Peter's things. She picked a few, his sketchbook, the jacket, and placed them in a memory chest she decided to keep. The rest, she donated. To young artists, to thrift stores, to anyone who could give those pieces a second life. Because Peter's life wasn't meant to be trapped in a closet. And just when she thought the hardest part was over, she reached into the second box. Her hand touched something small, fragile, and completely unexpected, something that stopped her breath. Stick around. What she finds next changes everything. The box was small, barely the size of a shoebox, tucked inside the second of Peter's things. Odella hadn't remembered packing it. When she opened the lid, nestled in a layer of yellowed tissue paper, was the one object that undid her: a cracked porcelain teacup with faded blue roses curling around the rim. She hadn't seen it in years. It was his cup. Her husband, Harlan, drank from it every morning for nearly half a century. No matter the weather, no matter where they were, Minnesota snowstorms, anniversary trips, even that strange week after his gallbladder surgery when everything tasted like cardboard, he insisted on that cup. "It tastes better from this one," he'd joke, even when the handle finally chipped and she threatened to toss it. He never let her. Odella held it now like it might break from the sound of her breath. A single, jagged crack ran down the side like a fault line. She traced it with her thumb, and everything came flooding back. Their first apartment, their last vacation, the morning he made her toast in the shape of a heart and burned it, the hospital room where she sat alone after he was gone, holding this very cup with shaking hands, as if he might walk back in and say, "Tea, my dear." She hadn't just saved it, she'd buried it. Not because she forgot, but because remembering hurt too much. She held the cup to her chest and whispered, not crying exactly, just letting the silence speak for her. "You served us well," she said softly, "but I don't need you to remember him anymore. I do that just fine." That moment wasn't dramatic. It wasn't loud. It was sacred. She wrapped the cup in clean linen, gave it one last look, and placed it in the donation box. Because Odella finally understood something it takes most of us a lifetime to learn. Letting go isn't the same as losing. You can love someone with your whole being and still not need a chipped cup to prove it. The memory, the real memory, lives inside you. Not in the porcelain, not in the crack. So many older adults hold on to objects that carry the weight of their most cherished relationships. A teacup, a necktie, a hairbrush, a perfume bottle. We hold them like lifelines, afraid that releasing them means the love disappears too. But the truth is, love doesn't live in things. It lives in how we live after. Odella didn't get rid of Harlan's memory. She simply chose not to confine it to an object anymore. And now I ask you, what would you do? Would you have kept the cup? Or let it go? Tell me in the comments. There's no wrong answer. Just real stories, and the courage to tell them. It wasn't until the hallway closet was bare, the attic shelves were empty, and the final label peeled off a dusty Rubbermaid bin that it truly hit her. Odella stood in the middle of her living room, surrounded by piles of donation bags, marked boxes for family, and a modest stack of things she chose to keep. But this wasn't just the end of a decluttering project. It felt like standing on the edge of a quiet ocean, watching the tide pull pieces of her back into the past, gently, but with finality. She sat down in her old rocking chair, hands folded in her lap, and looked around. The silence was different now, not empty, open, and that's when it came to her. She hadn't just been sorting through things. She'd been saying goodbye, not to people, not exactly, but to the versions of herself she had carried for decades, like extra coats in a warm room, the hopeful young wife who clipped coupons and wore red lipstick even to the grocery store, the teacher who stayed late decorating the bulletin board and carried a spare sandwich for the quiet kid who always forgot his lunch, the grieving mother who clung to Peter's jacket like it was a heartbeat, the cancer survivor who kept every medical bracelet in a box under her bed because throwing them out felt like tempting fate. Each item she let go of was more than just a thing. It was a little funeral, a quiet farewell to a former identity that had shaped her, but no longer defined her. That's something we rarely acknowledge, especially as we age. Decluttering isn't just about cleaning. It's a reckoning with who we've been and who we still are. Many seniors struggle with this hidden layer of the process. The guilt of letting go of wedding gifts, the ache of tossing baby clothes, the fear that donating the scrapbook means erasing the story. But Odella was starting to understand something liberating. Your story isn't stored in your attic. It's written in the way you live today. What we've lived through matters, but it's not where we live. And for the first time in years, Odella felt something she hadn't expected, relief. Not just from physical clutter, but from the silent pressure to keep proving her past. She didn't need to keep being the caregiver, the widow, the patient. She could just be Odella. Now, in this moment. Alive, curious, and still full of days worth living. But her journey wasn't over. Because just when she thought the last room would be the easiest, the guest bedroom, barely touched in years, she walked in and noticed something she hadn't seen before. Something unexpected. Something that changed the entire meaning of her letting go. And you'll want to see what she does next. Odella stood in the doorway of the guest room, barefoot on the wooden floor, her hand lightly resting on the doorframe, like she was meeting the space for the very first time. The room looked nothing like it did just a few weeks ago. No boxes, no stacks of books leaning like tired old men, no brittle wrapping paper or suitcases stuffed with maybe someday items. Just light, space, an air that somehow felt easier to breathe. She hadn't planned for this room to be the final stop. It used to be her overflow zone, the "I'll get to it later" space. Old holiday decorations, outgrown clothes meant for donation, unopened gifts from birthdays long past. It was a holding cell for things she didn't know how to decide on. But now, for the first time in over a decade, the carpet was visible from wall to wall. And it was beautiful. Just as she stepped inside, her granddaughter, Elise, popped her head in. "Grandma." Odella turned. Elise paused in the doorway and smiled. "You feel different," she said. "Not look different, feel different." That line lingered in the air like the scent of something familiar and comforting. Because Elise was right. Odella hadn't just made space in a room. She'd made space inside herself. In clearing out the clutter, she'd also cleared out the low hum of guilt, the heaviness of silent grief, the weight of unspoken expectation. Her body felt lighter. Her mind felt clearer. And for the first time in years, the future didn't feel like a hallway narrowing toward the end. It felt like an open door. She didn't rush to fill the space with new things. Instead, she opened the curtains wider, let the sun in, and pulled an old armchair into the corner. Not to store things, but to sit, to read, to exist. It wasn't about becoming someone new. It was about becoming more herself. At 92, Odella realized that letting go had never been about loss. It had always been about returning. Returning to who she was beneath the layers of roles, responsibilities, and reminders. She had finally come home to herself. And that's something so many of us forget. When we hold on to everything, we leave no room for what might be. New friendships, new joys, even just the stillness that lets peace in through the back door. So here's a gentle challenge. What would happen if you started with just one drawer? Not an entire room, not a garage full of boxes, just one drawer. What might you discover? Not just about the things you've held on to, but about the parts of yourself that are finally ready to breathe. Let me know in the comments. How would it feel to lighten your heart, even just a little? If you're over 60 and the past feels like it's stacked around you, in closets, in boxes, in drawers you haven't opened in years, remember this. Decluttering isn't about cleaning. It's about healing. It's not about throwing things away. It's about making space for the life that's still unfolding. Because the truth is, we don't live in our stuff. We live in our stories. And the ones that matter most? They don't need a dusty old ticket stub or a chipped plate to stay alive. They live in your laughter, in your memories, in the way you still show up, love deeply, and keep going. Odella's story might feel unique, but the feelings she faced are universal. The hesitation, the grief, the unexpected relief. You might be standing at the edge of your own journey right now, wondering where to start. Let this be your sign. Start small. A drawer, a shelf, a single item. Let each choice be an act of love for who you were and who you're still becoming. And if this story moved something in you, if it stirred a memory, made you reflect, or helped you feel just a little more seen, then don't keep it to yourself. Tap that like button. Share this with someone who's quietly drowning in memories they don't know how to face. And hit subscribe for more real, soul-stirring stories that meet you exactly where you are and help you gently move forward.